Hello and welcome to this little talk through of my top 10 favourite literary adaptations. But first, some preamble. This top 10 whatever you fancy meme was made by Demetria Miriam on DeviantArt, hence the American spelling of favourite. I have gone, or at the time of recording I plan to go into some detail about all of these, either in a ranking video or one of my read and watch series. So I'll try to be quick. These are not ranked, I can't do that. They are simply in chronological order. It's also slightly arbitrary. A couple of my favourite films are very loose adaptations of books that I don't actually like. These are my favourite adaptations where I am thinking about the book to some extent. Perhaps not quite so much with the first one though, The Wizard of Oz. Absolute classic from 1939, which I actually prefer to the book. And this really was my first obsession in fiction. I watched it over and over and over again when I was a very small child, and I did notice the differences from the abridged version of the book that we had. And if you've heard me on other videos go on about faithfulness, would it surprise you to learn that I was raised on a diet of, if it isn't in the book, it has no business being in the film? And it's hard to remember now, but I guess The Wizard of Oz and how much I wanted to watch it over and over made me think, well, perhaps I don't agree that that's always the case. Then we have Watership Down from 1978, a very truncated version of the book, and my first exposure to this story that I still find rather brilliant and fascinating. I've always said I was 8 when I first saw it. I don't now specifically remember being 8, but it does make sense for where we were when I was exposed to the film and the book, and I couldn't manage the book. And then we were still there a couple of years later when I managed to plod through the book, and I started to see how much was really missing from the film. If I had been older and read the book first, would the film have disappointed me? We'll never know. Next is the last one from before I was born, the Jane Eyre TV series from 1983, which I discovered as an adult, being already very well acquainted with the book, and I love it for being, in many ways, the book being picked up and plopped onto the screen, which includes the highly appropriate casting, opinions on Timothy Dalton's handsomeness notwithstanding. And next, The Witches from 1990. I probably didn't see it until a couple of years later, but I was still a fairly young child, and this is for me simply a highly engaging, highly accomplished, mostly faithful adaptation of a book by Roald Dahl. Probably I would have said my favourite author as a child. I say mostly faithful. It does its own thing in a couple of ways and makes a couple of alterations. My thoughts on those I plan to record and share with you another day. Then we have another childhood staple, Little Women from 1994, which I watched a number of times. It was probably the successor to The Wizard of Oz, really, before I got to know the book, and I loved it for what it was, and I still do. Getting to know the book later in life, I had to get my head around some little changes to the chronology and bits that were missing, but it was far too late for me to think any of that mattered. It was already firmly tattooed upon my heart. Pride and Prejudice 1995, I did not watch for many years. I didn't get particularly interested in Jane Austen until I was at least 25. I think if I had watched it as a child, I probably would have been bored by it. That's just me. I'm not saying all children are bored by Austen adaptations. This one is incredibly popular, highly acclaimed, I think probably greater than the sum of its parts. Parts which I shall not dissect in this video, but did I read the book or watch that adaptation first? I actually can't remember. Alice in Wonderland, I definitely read the book first, but not very often and probably not for quite a long time when this 1999 adaptation came on British TV in Easter 2000. So I was quite a teenager then, but I was still interested interested in watching these adaptations, and this one was a particularly pleasant surprise. A highly original and engaging realization of Wonderland, and its own little twist here and there which I hadn't seen before. I don't always like those. In the case of Alice in Wonderland, I'm fine with it, particularly if it's this adaptation. Then we have another Jane Eyre, 2006 this time. It's complete chance that it's right underneath 1983's Jane Eyre. I didn't plan for that. And I think it has a lot of the same things going for it. Overall, it is faithful, not as faithful. It makes up more of its own words, for instance. I don't mind that. I find it highly engaging. That's why it's on this list. Ballet Shoes from 2007. I definitely watched before I read the book. Had I read the book first, I might have been a bit annoyed by some of the slight differences, and one, I suppose, rather large difference, but I hadn't any particular notion of reading the book until I saw this adaptation when it came on TV that Christmas, and I thought, hey, this is really good. Read the book, thought, hey, this is also really good. And now my Noel Streatfeild book collection is rather large. And finally, another Little Women. Again, pure chance that the earlier Little Women is right on top of it. This was such a very pleasant surprise in 2017. I have, at the time of recording, already done my ranking video. Someone in the comments suggested that the one in second position, I seem as if I like it more and it should actually be in first. And that person may be right. 1994 was there when I was growing up. Perhaps my heart does prefer it. 2017 is long, and I like that because it means it can get more in, and if it's doing it well, that can only be a good thing, and I think it does do it very well indeed. And that was, I truly believe, the last time I enjoyed a new adaptation. Good adaptations for me started before 1939 and then petered out by the end of the 2010s. But who wants to hear me moaning about that? Well, if you do, my ranking videos are probably the place to go, or perhaps you'd rather leave it there. Either way, thank you ever so much for being even remotely interested, and perhaps I'll see you another day on another video. Bye for now.